Hey guys, it's Daniel. Welcome back.
The following is from Jim Morrison, Life, Death, Legend by Stephen Davis. I have a lot of videos about the Doors and specifically about Jim Morrison on my channel. If you want to see more and you want to support, the best way is to subscribe, like, and share. Quote, "The events surrounding Jim Morrison during the next 3 weeks in November of 1968 are both unclear and still in dispute. What is certain is that this crucial period changed the lives of everyone involved with him. The Doors continued working on their new album at Elektra Sound Studios. The Soft Paradise, Jim's episodic rock opera, which had been left off the last album, was resurrected and improved. Jim complained about singing the lamely provocative lyrics of Tell All the People. Robby Krieger refused to change them, so Jim insisted that from then on, all Doors songs should have individual publishing credits, a huge rift in the solidarity of the band. George Harrison visited the Soft Paradise sessions, observed producer Paul Rothchild's compulsive knob-turning, and made a few wry comments about it being as tedious as the Beatles sessions had become. Then, Jim disappeared. One day, he just didn't show up, and his cronies either didn't know where he was or wouldn't say that Jim had flown to London to get Pamela Courson back. She was in bad shape, having broken up with Christopher Jones. She had put her trust in Jones and thought her life with Jim was behind her. Jones then wrote an innocuous letter to his ex-wife, the mother of his daughter, and left it for his agent to mail. But Pamela intercepted the letter, read it, and took it as a betrayal. She was shattered. She was buying heroin from Jean de Breteuil's connections, the same dealer supplying Keith Richards' habits. When she ran out of money and was alone and frightened, she called Jim. The tone of her voice scared him. He got to London as fast as he could. At first, Jim couldn't find Pamela, and had to ask the Comte de Breteuil, whom he hated, where she might be. When Jim tracked her down, Pamela said she wasn't coming back, unless he quit the Doors. Jim argued with her in the Bag o' Nails, the popular exclusive nightclub. They fought. He got drunk, started crying, called her names. She threw her drink in his face at midnight, a few people applauded, and stormed out. An hour later, she knocked on the door of a moose house that Jones had moved into near Cadogan Square. "Where's Jim?" Jones asked, knowing he was in London trying to reconcile with Pamela. She told him. "So you just left him sitting there crying? Why don't you go get him?" he asked. "I don't think so," Pamela said, coming in for the night. "Let him cry. He likes it." Jim Morrison and Pamela Courson flew back to Los Angeles during the last week of November 1968. That was it for the Doors. Manager Bill Siddons told Jim about the Buick commercial first. Jim had come into the Doors office to read his mail. The staff was surprised to see him, but no one could ask where he'd been. Jim had a full beard again and didn't look well, also being jet-lagged and maybe drunk. Bill took Jim into his office and told him the good news, that the Doors had sold Light My Fire to General Motors for a Buick advertising campaign. When the ad agency needed a quick answer and they couldn't find him, the other three Doors had approved post-haste. Max Fink had signed off on the deal, having Jim's power of attorney. Jim listened quietly with growing anger as Bill outlined a deal that would bring the Doors $60,000 badly needed dollars for the rights to use Robby Krieger's song to promote Buick's new muscle car, the 1970 Grand Sports GS 455, on radio and TV. It was going to be "Come on Buick, Light My Fire" on the airwaves from coast to coast. Jim Morrison sat there in shock. He couldn't believe it. They told him it was Elektra's Jack Holzman's fault. Elektra Records would get $20,000 as its share. Soon, the band and its management met in emergency session. Jim's remarks were quoted 30 years later by Ray Manzarek. "You can't have signed without me. Why, man? We do everything together. Why'd you do this without me? So what? Couldn't you have waited for me?" Jim proceeded to curse at them all. Total silence. Jim had never screamed at them like that. He was blind with rage and looked distraught. He got up and stomped around. "F this, you guys. I thought we were supposed to be brothers." Ray tried to calm him down. "We are, man. Nothing has changed." Jim looked at him sharply. "Everything has changed. Everything. Because I can't trust you anymore. You guys made a pact with the devil." Ray cursed at Jim. "I know you, Ray," Jim said. "You're only in it for the money." There was a moment of silence. Robby told Jim there was nothing anyone could do. It was a done deal. "Oh yeah? We'll see about that." Jim was raving now, started talking about smashing up Buicks on stage with a sledgehammer. Everyone was in total shock. Bill Siddons. He felt betrayed. His partners had betrayed him. They had sold out to corporate America without asking him. He just didn't get it. Jim got on the phone with Abe Sommer, the band's lawyer. Threatened him with a lawsuit, tell him anything but stop the contract. But it was too late. The commercials were filmed and broadcast in a limited way, mostly in the South and Midwest. Bill Siddons recalls, "That was it. The end of the dream.
That was the end of Jim's relationship with the other members of the band. From then on, it was strictly business. That was the day Jim said, "I don't have partners anymore, I have associates." The other Doors went into shock. Other rock bands worked every night, made serious money on the road. The Doors could only work 3 nights on the weekends, the maximum that Jim Morrison could handle. Robby Krieger recalls the following. "After doing a show, we, the other Doors, were spent. We'd go out to our hotel rooms and crash. But Jim was just getting going, partying, hanging out, on through the next day. Then another show the next night, and Jim just kept going. That's why we never did long tours. Jim would get tired." The Doors thought selling Robby's song to Buick was a good way to offset this handicap. Heck, they had other songs too. There was real money there. But they were wrong. Jim Morrison refused to sell out. Bill Siddons recalls, "I knew Jim had a lot of serious problems. I didn't know what they were. I just knew he would put more alcohol into his body than anybody. I thought he was trying to commit suicide because the quantities didn't make any sense to me. He operated in Jimland, and nobody operated there but Jim." Jim was so alienated and pissed off that for a while it was questionable whether he would show up to tape the Doors' 2-song appearance on CBS's Red Hot The Smothers Brothers show on December 4th, 1968. But they needn't have worried because Jim Morrison had the same cash flow problems as everyone else. There was a new record to promote, and Jim arrived on time at CBS's Burbank studios in full leathers, no beard, and great hair. This would prove to be the last appearance of the Lizard King, who, as it turned out, was never seen alive again. Robby Krieger showed up with a wicked-looking black eye, gotten in a barroom brawl over a pool table. Jim had mouthed off and avoided being trashed by rednecks only because bodyguard Babe Hill had blocked the door with his body after Jim bolted. So the drunken moron smashed Robby in the face instead. Tom and Dick Smothers had a comedy act that mocked the pretenses of the early 60s folk revival. Their 18-month-old television show was radical for the times, with anti-Nixon jokes before the new president had even taken office, irreverent, double entendre satire, and cutting-edge musical guests. So the Doors went whole hog for the show, performing Wild Child and Touch Me, appearing on the latter, with the tuxedo-clad horn and string musicians from the Smothers Band. Elektra Records had provided an instrumental mix of the songs, over which Jim Morrison was required to sing live, a tough assignment requiring ultra-professional, split-second precision. He almost nailed it. Performing with his golden microphone, emoting into the cold red eye of the TV camera, Wild Child was perfect. But Jim horribly missed his vocal cue on the second verse of Touch Me. Since the show was taped, there was talk of a retake, but Curtis Amy had mimed the song's jazzy ride-out so well that the director told him to forget it. The Smothers Brothers were happy with the flawed, real-life version of the Doors they had captured. Indeed, the CBS broadcast later that month, December 15th, had unusually high ratings. Jim looked like a gray-eyed Achilles in his leathers and long hair. He never looked that good again. It was also the Doors' last appearance on commercial television in America. Inevitably, the Smothers Show would be cancelled 6 months later in the spring of 1969 after Joan Baez dedicated a song to her husband, David Harris, who was going to prison for refusing to fight in Vietnam. On December 8th, 1968, Jim Morrison was 25 years old. The office had a little party for him with a cake and candles. Afterward, Jim walked down the stairs with manager Bill Siddons' pretty blonde girlfriend, Cherry. He said to me, "Well, I made it to 25. Do you think I'll make it to 30? And we both knew he wouldn't make it to 30. A few days later, Jim brought the Doors' teenage office boy, Danny Sugarman, home to Pamela's flat for supper. Sugarman was a twitchy high school kid from a troubled family who hung around the Doors' office. Bill Siddons tried to get rid of him, but then Jim hired him to help answer his voluminous fan mail. They walked over to Pam's place, where she greeted the boy with the same steely glare and open contempt she displayed to anyone connected with the band. Danny noticed Jim's books stacked in milk crates against the walls, floor to ceiling. After shouting at Jim for bringing some kid home for dinner, Pam served a delicious lasagna, drank a glass of wine, and then nodded off in a heroin stupor, her head almost in her plate at one point. "Quick, take off," Jim whispered, grabbing his jacket. Pam came and started screaming again as they ran down the stairs. "Jim, where the heck are you going? Answer me, Jim." "Run," Jim advised, before she starts throwing stuff. "That chick has an arm like you wouldn't believe." The year 1968 had been a bad trip for everyone around the world. The Doors' final show of Bloody 68 took place at the Los Angeles Forum in Inglewood on December 14th. The big arena, home of the LA Lakers, was sold out. Touch Me was already on the radio in heavy rotation and climbing the charts. Jim was candid about his misgivings in a pre-concert interview. "I don't know what's going to happen," he said when asked about the future of the band. "I guess we'll continue like this for a while. Then, to get our vitality back, maybe we'll have to get out of the whole business. Maybe we'll all go to an island by ourselves and start creating something again." The Doors' performance was rudely received by the kids because the band was showcasing new songs backed by a horn section and a string quintet. Tell All the People opened the show and hardly anyone clapped. Other new songs and Spanish Caravan drew yawns and shouts for Light My Fire, which continued through Touch Me and Wild Child. When the band finally condescended to play Light My Fire, the audience came to life, flaring their lighters in a massive tribute to the band. The Doors played the song for their lives, and a tumultuous ovation thanked them when it was over. Then there was a long pause. Jim sat down with his legs dangling off the stage and started asking the kids up front in a tone bitter with mockery what they really wanted. Most of them said they wanted to hear Light My Fire again. To the astonishment of the audience, Jim suddenly asked, "Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin." He then finished the Forum concert with an alternate version of the complete celebration of the Lizard. Jim shrugged off protests and catcalls and recited in a swaying fervor, changing lyrics and adding new imagery. After 25 minutes, as he intoned the final Palace of Exile section, Densmore, Krieger, and then Manzarek left the stage. Jim finished the long poem. "Tomorrow we enter the land of my birth, I want to be ready," and then walked off to near silence. There was no ovation and no encore. 18,000 kids watched the empty stage as the house lights came up and then filed out in a whisper of mystification. After the show, when the giant parking lot was cleared, Jim went out in the dark and played Kick the Can with Pamela and a special guest, his younger brother, Andy Morrison. Pamela Corson's boutique, Themis, named for the Roman goddess of justice, was opened by Christmas of 1968. No one quite believed the money Jim had poured into the shop, with its decor of precious woods, fine silks, Moroccan hangings, and walls covered with peacock feathers. Stepping into Themis out of the blinding California sunlight, a customer's eyes had to adjust to a grotto-like darkness lit by scented candles. The shop was on the ground floor of the Clear Thoughts building, where Jim and the crew had their clubhouse, but they weren't allowed in the shop. Themis was deliberately expensive and fashion-forward, way ahead of its time. Pamela's sister Judy ran the business, while Pam and the Court de Breteuil took off on buying trips to Milan, Paris, and Marrakech. Jim was proud of Pamela's enterprise and energy. Jim was always giving her stuff, Doors photographer Paul Ferrara recalled. Money, clothes, cars, dogs, anything she wanted. He pampered the hell out of her. She'd want something, and he'd call lawyer Max Fink and say, give her whatever she wants. Money meant nothing to Jim. It was immaterial to him if he spent $1 on her or $100,000 as long as she was happy. When Pamela said she wanted a place in the country where she could get away from it all, Jim paid for a secluded cabin behind an old tavern up in tranquil Topanga Canyon. He wouldn't marry her, though. Everyone knew Jim had Pam where he wanted her, a friend of hers said later. And besides, he didn't trust her for a minute. He just loved her, that's all. The Doors accountant later estimated that Jim spent $250,000 pre-inflation dollars on the boutique, which became a hip fashion spot in late 60s LA. Miles Davis was an occasional customer in 69-70, but never made any money. Pamela took perverse pleasure in overcharging the other Doors wives when they shopped there. Jim and Pamela tried to stick together. He lived with her when he could. In private and in public, they kept to themselves. If they went to dinner in a group, they spoke only to each other. John Densmore and girlfriend Julia gave a Christmas party that year. Jim and Pamela went and just sat quietly on the steps together, like a quiet, reserved suburban couple. Everyone thought that was really sweet.